Hello, and welcome to another episode of TV Tube Front Porch Conversations. I'm going to give you a little, tell you about where we are this morning at the end of the broadcast, but I'd like you to look at the surroundings and see if you know where we are today. It's a different venue than we filmed in before, but it is a porch. We're glad to have you here.
Thank you.
And I know our viewers will be interested in hearing your stories.
I hope you're right.
Why don't we start with where your story began? Where were you each born and where did you grow up?
I was born in Aurora, Illinois, and was raised on a farm about 5 miles outside of Aurora, which was a wonderful experience. I was part of a blended family at the age of 7, I believe. I became part of that blended family, and there were 5 of us children. Got along beautifully, and being raised on a farm, had a lot of wonderful experiences. When my sister and I became teenagers and were in high school, we thought that we were in the worst place ever because we were on a farm, isolated, no way of getting into town, and all our friends were in town riding their bikes and doing fun things. So as it turned out, as I have gotten older, I've realized that it couldn't have been a better place to be raised. And I lived in that area for most of my life.
Bill, where were you? Where did you arrive?
I'm a native of the Boston area. I feel like I grew up in a little town outside of Boston, but it was right across the harbor from Logan Airport. But basically, I feel like Boston was my backyard. In high school, I got out of high school, I like to say at 20 minutes of 2 every day, and was in Boston by 2 o'clock, and worked as a teenager in Boston my high school years. And down on the waterfront, my grandfather had a restaurant right where now the New England Aquarium is, and that was all my backyard, and that's where I grew up. And lived in Massachusetts until I went to school in Aurora, Illinois, and lived there. Lived in Dowling Park for a couple of years, and then was back in Aurora, and eventually went to Maine, and lived in Maine for 30 years before coming to Dowling Park.
Well, I'm glad you told me that because I always thought of you as being from Maine, but you weren't, not originally. Do you have siblings?
I have siblings, yes. I have 2 children.
Siblings.
Oh, siblings. Oh, okay. Yes.
And your children have siblings.
I have one sister who's about 3 years older than I am, and she lives in northern Maine. She's a widow now, but I grew up and lived in northern Maine, up where it's cold, up in what we call Aroostook County, up in the county. And so I had one sister, and we grew up in Winthrop, Mass, and had a very good life.
And how about telling us where you met?
Bill and I both attended Aurora College at the time in the 50s. It's now Aurora University. And of course, I just came from 5 miles down the road on the farm. However, my parents were very insistent that I live on campus so that I could experience campus life. Plus, they were both graduates of Aurora College also. And so I did live on campus. And Bill, just so happened, came from Massachusetts to Aurora. And he and I dated for 2 years. This is in the 50s, mid to late 50s. And I don't remember the circumstances. We neither one do, or at least we're not telling each other. But for whatever reason, we went our separate ways. And always kind of knew where the other one was, but really had no communication with each other. He married, I married. We each had our families. I was still in the Midwest, and as he said, he was hither and yon. But I came to the village. I lived in Plainfield, Illinois, south of Aurora, for 35 years. And after my previous husband passed away and I retired from teaching, I decided that I was going to do something different. New life, new place. And my parents had been residents of the village here for 26 years. So I was very familiar with it. Plus, we were in college with Pomeroy and Jerry. So anyway, I came down to Dowling Park, and I was a widow, had been for 15 years maybe. And Bill and Shelley were both here at the time, and a few years after coming here, Shelley became ill, and after she passed away, Bill needed a favor done. He saw me somewhere and asked me if I was busy. I said, no. What do you need? And he said, well, could you give me a ride into town? He said, I've taken my truck in to have some work done on it, and if you take me into town, I'll buy dinner, and the rest is history. So, Bill and I were married a year and a couple months after we started dating, and it was quite an exciting time for the village to try to decide what was going on with this Marty and Bill.
Bill, what do you want to add to that story?
What a bet. One, I'd say Marty said she was born in Aurora. I don't think she was. I think she was born in southern Illinois.
I was born in Aurora, Illinois, and then we moved to down where my grandfather was in southern Illinois.
Yeah.
Yes, I don't remember I don't remember the birth or any of that, but I know that's where I was born. Copley Hospital.
Yeah, well, like I said, lived in Massachusetts and so on. And lived in Maine for 30 years and was involved in Service Master.
Why don't you tell our viewers what Service Master is in case they're...
Well, the part of Service Master I was involved in was the franchise side in the cleaning field. And I was conceptually the regional manager initially for Maine, a right and responsibility that I had purchased. My responsibility was to develop the state of Maine by selling and managing franchises in the state of Maine. And I did that. I went to the state of Maine in, I guess, 1960. Went there. And, no, 68. Anyway, went and then my responsibility and to develop the state of Maine by selling franchises, which I did sold, and then trained and then managed franchises. Did that for 30 years, and my problem was I always wanted to look beyond my borders, and eventually I controlled the state of Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont, and about half of New York State. And it was very rewarding. The rewarding part was selling a franchise, helping someone set up in business, and then helping them succeed. And the story that I like to tell is I sold a franchise to a fellow that initially he didn't have any money. I said, he'd be a good prospect if he could get some money. He called me back a couple weeks later, said, my brother-in-law is going to loan me some money. And so we set him up, got him set up business, and then 2 years later he called me and said, Bill, thank you. He said, before I set up business, I couldn't even afford to take my family out to dinner. Now I can. Well, that was the rewards for me. Sure, there was a financial reward, but the real reward was helping people develop. When we retired from that part of Service Master, I had that area of Service Master and also had a distributorship down in North Carolina, in the Piedmont area of North Carolina. But at that point, I was managing about 100 franchises. And so it was very rewarding. And so moved down here in 1996, and lived here. And as Marty said, with my wife, Shelley, and she became encumbered with sickness and eventually died in 2000, September 2000, after 2 or 3 years serious illness. So that's my part of the story. And then Marty and I became reunited, friendship, and it was pretty easy. We knew each other well, yes. For 40, 50 years, we hadn't been close, but with a college background, we knew,
You knew a lot of
we
people
knew
in
each other
common,
and
too.
knew friends and so on. So that was pretty easy, and it was an easy relationship for us to redevelop and to rekindle. And as I wrote a letter to our children as we were getting married, that this is what we're doing, and I'm not marrying a stepmother for you, or am I going to be a stepfather? This is companionship for us, and this is what we did, and our children have fully accepted it, and we have had good fellowship and no problem family-wise.
That's wonderful. And a tribute to both of you, I'm sure. I want to go back and ask Marty about a story I heard her tell a long time ago. And that was her days as a 4-H club member.
Okay. Yes, when we were in high school, as I had said, there were 5 of us in the home, and we all belonged to boys 4-H. My sister was about 9 months older than I am, so we 2 girls and then the 3 boys. And we showed shorthorn cattle. And one particular year, I can't remember exactly how we chose our steers. My dad and my older brother would go and pick these baby steers up and bring them back to the farm, and then we chose which one we wanted. But anyway, I chose a very, very good one. And this one year, we all went to the state fair, as we did every year, and my steer got the reserve grand champion of the fair, which was quite a big deal, really. And so I think I was telling Ann that I took the steer back to the pen where it was kept and tied him up, and then I hung the ribbon in front, big rosette ribbon in front of the steer. And then my sister and I went off to just do whatever teenagers do at a fair. And when I came back, my brother was there, and he was not very happy with me because the steer had eaten the ribbon and just chewed it and shredded it into bits. And he was just very, very upset with me that I had put it there, and said, you better go back to the office and see if you can get explain what happened and see if you can get another ribbon, which I was able to do. So that made him happy. But another story was the last fair in the state of Illinois is in Sandwich, Illinois, which was close to us. And so it was about the second week in September, I believe. And we all entered our steers at the Sandwich Fair. And it so happened that they were all about the same size, so they were all placed in the same class together. And as it worked out, we took the first 5 places, first, second, third, fourth, and fifth place. And no, we were not the only 5 in the, there were 20-some in our class. So anyway, we took the first 5 spots and gave the ribbons to Mother, who was embarrassed to be carrying those top 5 ribbons around, but she got over it, I think.
Well, I thank you for sharing that. It's fun to know something about a person that you had no idea about.
I gave the pictures of my steer with the 2 of us together. I have given those to one of my sons because he was, and the trophies gave to him too. So I don't have those things to prove it, but it is true.
Well, you've told it the very same way each time.
Oh, good. You didn't catch me then.
Marty, you were a teacher?
I was a teacher.
What did you teach?
I taught 2nd grade. Well, I taught 25 years, and I taught 1st grade 1 year, and I think third grade 2 years, but most of the time I taught second graders, which was, I loved second grade. They came in knowing enough, or they knew a lot, and they could be a little more independent. Mm-hmm. And they loved their teacher, and they loved school. And that was very rewarding. And there are still times when I go back up to the Plainfield area where I taught for those years, where I might see a previous student whom I do not recognize, but they recognize me. And they will come, and they'll come up to me and say, I was Mrs. Arbo then. They'd say, Mrs. Arbo, do you remember me? Without any clue as to who they are. And of course, when you have 25 years of children, some change, and there are those that don't. I mean, but I certainly couldn't put names to them, but they would have to tell me who they were and then be very complimentary, I love second grade, or you were my favorite teacher, which is a nice thing to hear.
Absolutely.
But it was I ended up there before I came here with a class of 32 second graders, which was about 10 more than I should have had. But under the circumstances, the district could not keep up with the growth in the community. It started out when I started there as a farming community of 3,000 people. And it's probably, 75,000
Wow.
people now. So the village could not keep up with the growth of the subdivisions and so forth. So they put a cap on our enrollment at 32. So it was challenging.
Bill, when did you first come to Dowling Park? Did you come in college? Did I remember hearing you say that?
No, I didn't come in college. I came after college. My problem is that I became friends with Pomeroy Carter in college, and of course Pomeroy has quite a history here. His father became superintendent while we were in college. So I came down one summer, and when I was working for the college, and went and counseled in camp and so on. And then in '61, I came down and was on staff for 2 years, back when there was the Advent Christian Orphanage, I guess, at Dowling Park. Now, historically, Marty and I are both Advent Christian background, but in our Advent Christian churches for many years, on the fifth Sunday, we collected money for Dowling Park. So we always knew Dowling Park, didn't know what it was really, but anyway, I came down here in '61 and was on the staff for 2 years, and left in the middle of '63. And then in I think '73, I became a board member. I was on the board and just got off the board about 5 years ago. I was on the board for 44 years, I believe.
That must be some kind of record.
Well, no, then I was chairman for 24 years. And but I felt it was time to make a change and step down, and it was rightfully so. But yeah, I've been involved with the village for many, many years, and it was just a natural thing for us to, when we were retiring, that this is where we're coming. And so it's a little bit different way of life than living in Maine, but so be it. We've adjusted.
Maybe not August is not a pleasant experience.
You're right. August ain't pleasant, isn't pleasant, but we have air conditioning, and that makes a difference. When I first lived here in '61, we didn't have air conditioning. It was just plain hot, and we did get install an air conditioner in our unit, but it was hot. And I'd say the thing we did back then is every night in the summertime, the first thing we did after we got through work was go take a swim in the Swanee River to get cooled off. That's when the river was seemingly a lot more approachable than it is now.
In what way?
In what? Well, it was the kids swam there every afternoon.
Oh,
There was
okay.
a raft down there, and that was the swimming hole, and that's where it was. 4th of July with the kids, and now back then We had, I think, maybe 30 children or 30 plus children, and we did a float down the river, the 4th of July, in tubes and so on, and just had a great time. Had a great time. Now people are afraid of the river and afraid of snakes and alligators and so on. Back then, hey, we lived with it, and that was part of life.
Yeah. During your time at the village, you've seen a lot of growth and have been instrumental in helping with a lot of that growth. Would you tell us what you feel like the biggest accomplishment the village has made during your time involvement?
Oh, well.
Or is that narrowing it down too much?
No, but the biggest gift I think the village had was Pomeroy's vision. Pomeroy doesn't want to take any credit. That's Pomeroy Carter for those who aren't familiar with him. And Pomeroy had a vision, and the Lord used him, and plus the Lord's direction. And so, yes, when I first came here, the road was paved right to the entrance to the village, opposite the chapel. The road was paved that far. Beyond that was a dirt road. And yes, I tell a couple of stories. I grew up in Boston area, urban, where if you wanted water, you went to the spigot and turned the water on. Well, the first week I was here, Pomeroy's family took his dad to Riverview or Riverside Hospital in Jacksonville, where he had some medical problems, and I was left in charge. And I had not a clue what was happening, and the first thing they said is, the water is waterlogged, it's airlocked. And that's great, what's an airlock? Well, what happened is we had a 500-gallon tank on top of the ground, and the way you got water pressure, you pump that tank full of water, and the pressure of the air gave you air pressure or water pressure, and eventually the air would leak out and you'd lose pressure. And so I had to learn how to deal with those kind of things, and it was just a real rural situation. And so we had one telephone, and the folks here did not use a telephone. I mean, the natives, because they had grown up without a telephone. So a lot of these things have changed. So the village now has become really a 20th century operation with all kinds of 20th century appliances and so on, and so we're very grateful for that. But I credit Pomeroy's vision, and the Lord used him, and people supported him and financially, and so that enabled the village to become what it is today.
And in 1961, when you came, were you drinking sulfur water?
Oh, yes. Was that what it was? Whatever it was, it stunk. Yeah. It was sulfur water. Yes, ma'am.
Well, I grew up in a town that was our city water. Oh, was sulfur water, and I never knew it smelled bad until other people told me, or that it tasted funny.
Let me add something to the way the village looked back in the 70s, middle 70s, when my parents came. Right across the street from their home, and their home was down, they built a home down in the Carter House area, was a pasture with cows. I mean, we looked over, just walked across the road, and there were, I don't know how many cows they had, and
Black Angus, yeah.
And now we have phones that everybody knows how to use.
Yeah.
But that was, very, very different today than what it was. The parking lot there by the Lake Aquila was a pasture, and so they've done a lot.
And I'd mentioned, yes, we had a large herd of Black Angus. We had a large herd of Black Angus cattle, and we had hogs. And every night we had to slop the hogs. And we cooked the swill, and then the next night after it was cooked, we fed the hogs. And that was one of the things I had to do and lead slopping the hogs. But the kids had responsibility, and they worked, and they did a lot of those kind of chores. But
I know that y'all have traveled a good bit. Do you have some trips hopefully planned to come up soon?
Hopefully is the word, but not until January. We have plans, reservations, to go to New Zealand, which I guess might have been on the bucket list. And now we're thinking that's our plans are for New Zealand only, but now we're thinking maybe we need to go to Australia for 2 or 3 days. But anyway, that's the plan.
Yeah.
Nothing between now and then, which I guess is just as well, because I don't think we'd be able to do it. So,
And what else is on the bucket list for the two of you?
survive this virus.
We tried to discuss that together and come up with a list, and we didn't. We have done some Caribbean cruises, and we've done a river cruise in European river cruise, starting at Budapest and going down to Amsterdam, and we thoroughly enjoyed that. We also had another bus trip in Europe, and we took a river cruise up the St. Lawrence last year. And so we enjoy that, enjoy cruises. We don't know. We'll probably do something like that in the future, but right now New Zealand is foremost, and if it's going to happen, we'll see what this pandemic does to that. But we hope.
We took a Gaither cruise, which we found to be very, very enjoyable because there were no casinos open and no bars open, and everyone on the ship was there to hear the Gaithers. So that was very enjoyable. Every evening our entertainment we were divided into groups, and our entertainment was the Gaithers.
Gaither concert.
And it was fun to see them in a different setting, like you would go up on a deck where people were sunning around the pool, and there'd be some of the Gaithers there, and so it was just neat to see them as regular people doing regular things.
Well, thank you so much for joining me here this morning. And for our viewers, we are on the porch at the Copeland Community Center. This is a beautiful place to be, and I think you'll see it in the background of our shots. But we want to thank Tom for setting up to film for us today, and he'll edit it, and you'll be able to see it on TV too. And if you haven't been to the porch at the Copeland Community Center, come by and enjoy the view.
When you can.
When you can.